Tansin itute mak tiar wheatley nisigasun o pasquiak uche. Tawau. Welcome to APTN National News. First Nations leaders in Saskatchewan are speaking out this hour following the Indigenous Services Canada and KPMG forensic audit of the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations. Saskatoon Tribal Council Chief Mark Arcand is hosting a news conference this morning in Saskatoon. Arcand is calling for accountability for the $34 million in questionable spending. Arcand addressed several aspects of the 9 allegations covered by the audit. He urged, quote, the corporation, unquote, to start taking responsibility for their actions.
We look at massive payouts to former employees. We look at vice chiefs that were on leave that is questionable in funding. Who is that? Which of those vice chiefs is going to stand up and say, I was on leave, it was me. This is what I did. Here's the proof. We need people to start being honest with our people and start saying, this is the decision that I made. I was in charge. But they're not doing that. We will not know the truth unless somebody stands up and says, the people in charge have to start telling us the truth.
We will have more from that press conference on tonight's newscast. Plus, our Truth and Politics panel speaks to the issue later in the show. APTN News has learned that Assembly of First Nations Regional Chief for New Brunswick, Joanna Bernard, has resigned from the Child and Families portfolio. Bernard says difficulties working with the National Children's Chiefs Commission led to her resignation. APTN's Fraser Needham has that story.
In a letter obtained by APTN News, Bernard says her resignation is the result of the National Children's Chiefs Commission constantly trying to sideline the AFN as they prepare to negotiate a long-term agreement on First Nations child welfare reform with Ottawa. The letter says the NCCC has repeatedly disrespected the AFN and my role as portfolio holder and stalled our efforts to work together. It also says, we have seen this through the lack of respect to the development of our Memorandum of Understanding, AFN staff being asked to leave NCCC meetings when other organizations are permitted to stay, last-minute invites, and not providing materials, time, or space for the AFN Secretariat to support me from a technical level. Chief Pauline Frost of the Vuntut Gwich'in in Yukon chairs the now 19-member commission.
Working as First Nations across the country, it's not advisable for us to go out and divide ourselves, because that's what Canada wants. So our objective is really to start working towards reform. And the accusations and the comments is really not reflective of our views, and we've made it very clear right from the get-go.
First Nations Child and Family Caring Society Executive Director Cindy Blackstock told APTN News her organization has a good relationship with the NCCC. This includes working together to meet a Canadian Human Rights Tribunal order issued last month telling Ottawa, the AFN, the NCCC, and Caring Society to get back to the table to negotiate a long-term reform agreement.
So we've been working with technical experts across the country, including those at the National Children's Chiefs Commission, to come up with a consultation document, which should be ready in a matter of days. And then that'll be provided to leadership and experts in the region to provide feedback into that plan.
Frost reiterated that if the parties negotiating with Ottawa are divided, it will only further hurt First Nations children.
We need to work together because the solutions are there. And we've been at this far too long, and children are still being, imagine the child that was born 18 years ago, 18 years now, 18 years we've been at this, and the child's now aged out of the system and still hasn't been provided supports and services.
Bernard originally agreed to an interview with APTN News, but later declined. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Ginanaskamitin Fraser, Mohawk students with special educational needs from Tyendinaga First Nation in Southern Ontario were left on the sidelines by a federal program put in place to support those needs. Jordan's principle was put in place to provide access to a range of services, including for health and education. With no funding in place for the 2025 school year, the Tyendinaga Mohawk Council stepped in. According to Chief Donald Miracle, there was no choice but to cover the 67 children and youth in September, or they wouldn't have had the supports to succeed. He's now drafting a letter to the Minister of Indigenous Services requesting the proper funding without delay. Miracle says this should have been dealt with in a timely manner.
I think it hasn't been handled, and I'm not happy with that. And I think, you know, the federal government should have staffed up so that these applications could have been dealt with. And if there were budget shortfalls, there should have been briefing notes to the minister. Maybe there has been, I don't know. And the minister should have been advocating at the cabinet table so that the cabinet is aware of what the needs are that really deal with the First Nations who have a disadvantage, maybe a learning difficulty in the educational system.
All week, we've been covering incidents of vandalism and harassment affecting 2 female First Nation provincial cabinet ministers in Manitoba. Firefighters responded to 4 small fires at one minister's constituency office since early August. The other minister had the front windows of her office smashed in. Premier Wab Kinew has been silent on the issue until we reached him at an unrelated news conference early Thursday. He says the government doesn't speak publicly about safety issues for security reasons, but he denounces extremism on all sides.
There's no place for violence in our politics, and there's no place for threats of a physical nature or intimidation in our politics either. If we focus on the things that we have in common, it is going to lead to a safer society. It's going to lead to a society where everyone can reach their full potential. And we also have a responsibility as people in the public sphere not to amplify divisions in the society. This is not going to be breaking news, but you can't firebomb anywhere in our society. It doesn't matter if it's an MLA's office, or if it's a park building, or if it's a business, or if it's a community center. No firebombing, please.
At the same event, Premier Kinew also addressed problems within child and family services in the province, saying there needs to be improvement. Last week, Winnipeg police arrested 2 foster parents, a 25-year-old female and 26-year-old male, in relation to a child abuse investigation. According to police, a child under their care was transported to hospital in critical condition and sustained life-altering injuries. 3 other children were removed from the home and taken to hospital for medical assessment, where one of which showed signs of being assaulted. Police say the critically injured child did not receive immediate medical attention prior to police intervention. Kinew says he's not satisfied with oversight in the CFS system.
Well, I'm not satisfied because we have kids going into foster care. You know, we want a society where everybody who brings a child into the world is well enough to raise them on their own. And I will never be satisfied until that's the reality, so there's always going to be more work to do. We'll definitely have to do a lot differently in the future. I mean, you don't beat up kids. Everyone knows this. How is it that this even happened in the first place? It's an important question to answer.
We're always looking for your feedback or story ideas. Here's how you can continue the conversation. If you have a story you want to share, send us an email to news@aptn.ca. To read and watch our stories, go to aptnnews.ca. You can find us online on your favorite social media sites, including TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, and X. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. And we take you to Australia to hear from our colleagues at NITV, plus hear from our Truth and Politics panel when we come back. Cheskwa. Pitigwe. The Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations Audit was one of many topics for this week's Truth and Politics panel. Here's part of that conversation that Dennis had with Jennifer Leowitz, the CEO of Pasqua Strategies, and Negon Sinclair, a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press. This discussion was held yesterday before today's press conference in Saskatoon.
Jennifer, the federal audit into the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations is finally public. The numbers are what had been reported. Anything stick out to you from the audit?
I think what stuck out for me the most was how evident it is that, ISC is essentially in these things for themselves. And I mean that respectfully. But at the same time, we're starting to see what forensic audits actually look like from a federal government. And I think a lot of people are not understanding that, forensic audits from the federal government is them essentially auditing how that funding was received by that organization and some of the recommendations that come from it. So they audit things like program spending and that sort of thing. They're not going to go, down into the weeds and start releasing names or anything like that. So it comes back to us as a people on what type of accountability parameters are we actually putting onto our leadership. I don't care how soft or how hard anyone thinks that this audit was when it was communicated. What actually concerns me is the fact that the FSIN leadership has not been communicating with anybody. Where are you? What is going on? Like, what is happening here? Do you not have a crisis communications team that could at least give you a hint that you should be talking not only with your chiefs, that you represent over 70 of them, but with everyone else that is still not hearing from the FSIN? I cannot believe that they read this report on September 11th. Today is the 24th or 25th of September. We still have not heard from them. And this is supposed to be the political body that represents First Nations in Saskatchewan. And right now we're seeing a political body that does not have the backbone to communicate on what the heck is going on internally there and why we're hearing about, tens of millions of dollars being questioned.
We are expecting to hear from some First Nations leadership tomorrow on Friday, not the FSIN that I am aware of, but Niigaan, over $34 million in questionable, ineligible, or unsupported spending. We'll hear more, I guess, tomorrow, but what do you think happens next here?
Yeah, we went through some of the nuts and bolts last week on the podcast here. You start losing a sense of the intricacies of what Jen's talking about when they talk to me these big figures of money and kind of the unaccountability. Now, there's two ways to look at it. The first is that First Nations organizations are chronically under-resourced, underfunded, under-supported. Human resources are often at a minimum. Nobody on a First Nation grows up to dream to be an accountant. And so when we do get accountants, A, they're very rare, and B, they're not often our people. We often have to work with people outside of our communities who are interested far more in profit than community development. And so we're struggling all the time trying to, just administrate and deal with this massive bureaucracy of the federal government. On another level, it's exactly what Jen spoke about. As a member of the media, I'm constantly frustrated with the fact that, frankly, Indigenous organizations, especially groups that are formed from chief lobby efforts, which are not really governments often, they act as they want to be treated like governments when they want to be treated like governments, but then when they want to be held accountable like governments and they suddenly are not governments anymore, they certainly don't act that way. They ban media from meetings. They have closed door. They target people particularly, and one of, Jen certainly knows that personally. This is not the way governments are supposed to act. They're supposed to be for the people, by the people, all those kinds of things. And oftentimes, I think First Nations organizations are able to put up a shield to say, I'm government on a Thursday, but I'm not government on a Friday. And I think that is a real sad, tragic part of this whole story, which is that our leadership doesn't often feel that they can have to be accountable to people like media or, frankly, even some of their own citizens. And that's very frustrating because many of us are out there saying always, recognize First Nation sovereignty, recognize that we have the ability to speak for ourselves, and then work very hard within communities to do that. And then certain individuals in certain positions of power then act differently.
Always a great conversation. Great to see you both. Thanks.
Thanks.
History has been made in Australia with the nation's first treaty legislation entering the Victorian Parliament. It's the culmination of decades of work from First Nations activists, with Mob in the States saying heralds a new treaty era. This from Cameron Gooley at NITV News in Australia.
An agreement 2 centuries overdue, as Victoria becomes the first state in the Federation to put treaty legislation before Parliament.
Australia is the only Commonwealth country in the world that doesn't have a treaty with its First Peoples. And today, we take a key next step to address that.
Victoria has been on the journey to treaty for nearly a decade, but treaty is the culmination of many decades of activism and work.
After nearly a year of formal negotiations, the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria and the state government have finally reached an agreement on Australia's first ever statewide treaty. Key to the treaty is making the Assembly permanent and expanding its powers.
As the democratic and representative body, the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria will be made permanent to make sure our communities are properly represented. Under treaty, government must speak with us when making laws, rules or policies about us.
Under the agreement, the Assembly will create a truth-telling and healing body to continue the work of the York Justice Commission. It will also create an Outcomes and Justice Commission with the power to hold the government accountable and question ministers over First Nations issues. Other bodies that will be created under the treaty include an infrastructure fund for Aboriginal organisations and an education institute to help build up the next generation of leaders.
Treaty is all about driving better services. It's all about getting better outcomes, and it's going to be delivered because Aboriginal people will get to have a say.
Under treaty, school curriculums will also be changed so students can learn the true history of the state, and work will begin to restore Aboriginal place names to locations around Victoria, such as national parks and some waterways. Today marks the first step in the parliamentary process, but the bill is expected to be put into law by the end of the year. While the government is steadfast in its commitment for treaty, the coalition remains opposed.
There are different ways to reach closing the gap. The First Nations people and the government believe there's one way. We believe there's another way.
Those involved calling for unity on an agreement aimed at bringing communities together.
Together, Victorians will make history. This moment belongs to all of us.
Cameron Gooley, NITV News.
We now want to tell you about this week's web poll questions. First, we asked, should there be a special charge and sentence for politically motivated crimes? The options are yes, no, and unsure. Our second question was, are you concerned about your privacy when using TikTok? Your options there again are yes, no, and I don't use TikTok. And our last question was, what should the government do to crack down on hate crime? More money towards programs, more policing, higher sentences, or unsure are your options. You can go to our website, aptnnews.ca/poll to cast your ballot. We'll have the results for you next week. And we take you to Vancouver for a sidewalk unveiling in honor of Orange Shirt Day. That story when we come back. Chesqua. Starting on the East Coast, St. John's 18, Charlottetown 19. Kuujjuaq 6, Happy Valley Goose Bay 12. Chibougamau 10, Quebec City 18. North Bay 12, Sault Ste. Marie 16. Big Trout Lake 12, Kapuskasing 14. Churchill 8, Puckatawagan 13. Barons River 15, Brandon 17. Saskatoon 10, Regina 13. Uranium City 9, La Ronge also 9. Moving west, High Level 17, Peace River 15. Edmonton 20, Lethbridge 21. Bella Coola 7, Campbell River 14. Dease Lake 6, Smithers 11. Over to the north, Old Crow -1, Mayo 4. Norman Wells 9, Fort Simpson 13. Tuktoyaktuk 1, Colville Lake 8. Cambridge Bay 7, Chesterfield 4. Arctic Bay 0, Iqaluit 6. In Yellowknife, a march for the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation took place. People came to Sambake Park in Yellowknife to march through downtown to the Legislative Assembly building. The march was organized by NACA Power Utilities, an Indigenous-owned power company in the Northwest Territories. They partnered with Dene Nation and other Indigenous groups to organize the march. NACA Power has been around for 70 years, with many of its employees being residential school survivors. Daryl Bolio, chair of the board of directors for NACA Power, explains why NACA wanted to give its employees this opportunity for remembrance.
We're an Indigenous, Northern Indigenous company. We have Northern Indigenous employees. As I mentioned earlier, we've had 3 generations of families work for NACA Power Utilities, and we service Indigenous communities.
There are many, many events happening in honor of Orange Shirt Day on September 30th across the country. APTN's Tina House has a story about a community in North Vancouver who is unveiling a unique tribute to honor this day.
It's a day of celebration as the Tsleil-Waututh Nation in North Vancouver unveil their Orange Sidewalk, honoring the Every Child Matters campaign, started by the Orange Shirt Society. Phyllis Webstad is the founder of the organization, and it's her orange shirt story that started the movement. For Chief Justin George, it's a time of reflection on what this project symbolizes.
You know, it's mixed emotions. You know, but it's a beautiful day because it's really about recognition and really honoring, you know, the dark history. But more importantly, it's how our elders and ancestors were just so resilient. And I mentioned earlier, you know, mentally, physically, emotionally, so hurt. And it's a dark history for our people.
Candy Thomas is the artist who designed the sidewalk, and she says she is honored to do this important work and create this design.
Thunderbird, he's embracing the babies that never made it home from residential school.
And for Chief George, whose own father, the late Chief Leonard George, was taken to a residential school at just 5 years old. He says we have come a long way, but so much more healing needs to take place.
But the beauty of today is around healing and moving forward, and really that's the strength of our elders and ancestors. You know, they couldn't break their spirit, and it's that light that they brought forward to the next generations. And you know, everybody's different in their healing journey, you know, and so there's still suffering and need of that support, and we have to be aware of that. But as a collective and as a whole, I think we've come a long ways.
The Orange Shirt Society has launched 15 orange sidewalks across Canada so far. Tina House, APTN National News, North Vancouver.
Ginanaskamitin Tina. We are joined now, like most Fridays, by the host of APTN Nouvelles Nationales, Kim Sullivan. Hey Kim, what will our French viewers get on tonight's broadcast?
We thought the big story this week was the AFNQL unions and environmental organizations coming together Monday to ask for the withdrawal of Bill 97. But yet and behold, Quebec announced yesterday that they are dropping the bill. So we chat with the regional chief of the AFNQL about this gain. Kent Monkman's famous paintings made their Canadian debut, and we give you a sneak peek. And we also chat with Melissa Malin-Dupuis about our special September 30th programming. Join us tonight, 6:30 Eastern.
And that's your daytime newscast for this Friday, the last one in September. Dennis Ward will be back at 6 p.m. Eastern. I'm TR Wheatley. It's been a pleasure to be here with you. From all of us at APTN to all of you, Egose, Gitam, Kikawapamitinano.